It starts with something so strange, so impossible, that even the most experienced air traffic controllers refused to believe their own eyes. The morning was ordinary, just another slow, warm day at Caracas International Airport. Birds circling above the runway, the low hum of jet engines, the distant chatter of ground crew. Control Tower Officer Juan de la Corte sat in his chair, sipping lukewarm coffee, half listening to pilots requesting routine clearances. Everything was normal. Everything was predictable. Everything made sense. Until 9:07 a.m. The radar, usually dry, smooth, silent, suddenly flickered. A faint green blip appeared far out in the eastern sky. It wasn't on the schedule. It wasn't in their system, and it wasn't following any known route. Juan frowned. He tapped the radar screen. The dot sharpened, slower than a commercial jet, but steady, purposeful. Strange, he whispered to himself. He picked up the radio, expecting static or silence. Instead, he heard a voice. Not just any voice, a voice that sounded like it was coming through decades of dust. Grainy, old, too old. Caracas Tower, crackle. This is Pan American, Flight 914, crackle, requesting permission to land. Juan froze. His blood ran cold. Pan American? Pan Am? That airline had shut down more than a year ago, but even that wasn't the shocking part. Pan Am Flight 914 was a flight number so infamous, so buried, that Juan felt his throat tighten. He knew that number. Everyone in aviation knew that number. It was the plane that disappeared in 1955. Vanish. Poof. Gone from the sky like smoke. Declared lost. Declared dead. Declared impossible to ever return. And yet, it was calling him. Right now. On his radio. Juan's hands trembled as he pressed the transmit button. Pan Am 914, repeat your origin? The voice replied, slightly annoyed. We departed from New York at 9:55 a.m., July 2nd, 1955. We're scheduled to land in Miami in about 20 minutes. What's the problem, Tower? Juan's heart hammered in his chest. 20 minutes? Miami? 1955? This wasn't a radio glitch. This wasn't a prank. The radar showed an actual aircraft approaching the airport. And the pilot was speaking with absolute confidence, as if he still lived in a world that had disappeared nearly 40 years ago. Juan's voice broke. Pan Am 914. What is your current fuel state? The pilot chuckled. Fuel state? We took off less than an hour ago. We're fine. Juan felt sweat trickle down his face. This was impossible. A plane from 1955, arriving in 1992, with full fuel, new paint, steady engines, as if it had simply flown straight through the sky without a single minute passing. Tower, do you copy? Tower, do you copy? We're approaching your runway. Is everything all right down there? Juan couldn't talk. He could only stare. He cleared the runway. He signaled all ground staff to stand by. They expected an old, rusted aircraft, something battered by time. But what rolled out of the clouds was something else entirely. A plane that looked brand new, shining, polished, perfect, like a photograph from 1955 brought to life. The giant jet descended effortlessly, engines humming with a purity no modern aircraft could match. Its wheels touched the runway with a smoothness that didn't belong to a plane that had been missing for nearly 4 decades. Workers stood motionless, as if watching a ghost land right in front of them. Inside the windows, Juan saw people, real people, reading newspapers from the 1950s. Children playing with toys that no longer existed. Passengers sipping drinks from brands long gone. Nobody looked older. Nobody looked confused. They were living in the wrong century, but they didn't know it yet. The plane rolled to a stop. The engines hissed to silence. The sun glinted off the bright Pan Am logo, a logo the world hadn't seen on a functioning aircraft in years. Slowly, very slowly. The cockpit window slid open. The pilot leaned out, and with a voice that trembled with growing fear, he asked, "Tower, can you confirm something for me? What year is this?" Juan swallowed, barely able to breathe. "It's 1992. The pilot's eyes widened, not just with shock, but with terror, a deep, primal terror. Behind him, passengers began shouting, panicking, pressing against the windows. And then, without warning, the pilot slammed the cockpit window shut. The engines roared back to life. Ground crew yelled. Juan screamed into the radio. Alarms blared, but it was too late. The ghost plane was turning, accelerating, preparing to take off again. And what happened next was something no one at that airport would ever forget. Something that would remain unsolved forever. Something the government tried desperately to erase. The runway was shaking under the roar of the engines. Ground crew waved frantically, trying to stop the plane. But the pilot wasn't looking anymore. He wasn't thinking. He wasn't in control. It was fear. Pure, uncontrollable fear. As if he'd seen something in this new world that he wasn't supposed to see. The aircraft turned sharply, its wheels screeching, rubber burning against the asphalt. Airport alarms screamed through the air. Security vehicles raced toward the plane. But none of it mattered. The Boeing jet, missing for 37 years, was ready to fly again. Juan shouted into the radio, "Flight 914, shut down your engines. You are not cleared for takeoff. You need to stay on the ground. Do you understand?" No answer. Just the deep, rising thunder of engines reaching full power. Inside the plane, passengers were pressed against the windows, faces pale, terrified, disoriented, watching a world they didn't recognize. Glass buildings instead of old terminals. Digital screens instead of manual boards. Cars they had never seen in their lives. A man inside held a newspaper titled July 2nd, 1955. He stared at the modern world outside like it was a nightmare. "Sir," a ground officer yelled, waving desperately, You can't take off." The pilot couldn't hear him, or maybe he refused to. The engines roared louder, 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 and then the aircraft shot forward. The wheels left the ground. The shadows of the wings cut across the runway. The control tower watched helplessly as the ghost plane climbed into the sky, faster than it had any reason to go. Juan watched the radar, expecting to track it. But as soon as the plane reached 1,200 feet, the radar dot blinked. Once, twice, and then it disappeared. Not faded, not lost in signal, not jammed. It simply vanished, the same way it did in 1955. Juan's breath stopped. He felt a coldness settle over him, a coldness that whispered that he had just witnessed something that could never be explained. Airport security rushed into the tower. Where did it go? Did it crash? Did it turn? Did the pilot say anything before takeoff? Juan could only stare at the empty airspace. "No," he whispered. "It just disappeared." Investigators from the government arrived within hours. They questioned every witness, every worker, every controller. Some workers insisted they saw the plane glowing faintly before it disappeared. Some swore the air around it shimmered, like heat waves bending reality itself. Others said they saw nothing supernatural, just a plane taking off and vanishing into clear blue sky. But one thing was clear. No one could prove anything. No one could explain anything. And no one was allowed to talk about it again. All recordings were seized. Radio logs were erased. Security footage went missing. Ground crew were forced to sign documents swearing silence. And Juan de la Corte, the man who spoke to the pilot, disappeared from public records entirely within 2 months. But something survived. A maintenance worker who had been the closest to the cockpit, found a small object on the ground. The one thing the pilot accidentally dropped in his panic. A pocket calendar. Brand new. Perfectly preserved. Printed with the date. July 1955. Fresh ink. Untouched paper. No signs of aging. Not even a yellow tint. It shouldn't exist. Not like that. Not after 37 years. But it did. Investigators confiscated it. But not before the worker told others about it. Whispers spread through the airport. Rumors grew like shadows. And soon, pilots flying over the Caribbean began noticing strange things. Ghosts on the radar. Voices on the radio. A plane that called itself Pan American Flight 914, asking for landing clearance, only to vanish moments later. Some pilots said they saw lights moving silently above the clouds. Too slow for jets, too fast for anything else. Some said they heard faint music from the 1950s coming through their headsets when the sky was absolutely silent. Others heard a voice saying, Pan Am 914, requesting approach coordinates. Always the same phrase, always the same tone, like a recording stuck between time itself. No one could trace the source, no one could prove it was real, but too many pilots reported it for it to be a coincidence. Maybe the plane was still trying to land. Maybe it was stuck, somewhere between 1955 and 1992. A place with no time, no past, no future. Or maybe it never truly left the sky at all. Weeks passed, but the memory of that day didn't fade. If anything, it became darker, heavier, like a shadow stretching across everyone who'd seen the plane. Passengers from the airport reported having dreams. The same dream, again and again. A plane drifting through clouds, silent, weightless, with faces pressed against the windows. Faces that looked alive but didn't blink. One mechanic said he dreamt the pilot was standing outside his bedroom door, knocking slowly, rhythmically. When he opened the door, no one was there. Only a faint voice. Please, we need to land. He quit his job the next morning, moved to another city, never stepped foot in an airport again. But nightmares were just the beginning. Something else happened, something no one could ignore. Late one night, 2 air traffic controllers at a different airport in Venezuela received a weak signal on their frequency. A signal so old, the radio almost couldn't process it. This is Pan American, Flight 914, fuel low, requesting emergency landing. The controllers stared at each other. This wasn't Caracas. This wasn't even the same airspace. And yet, the voice sounded identical. Same tone, same static, same pilot. Pan Am 914, the controller said. State your position. The response was chilling. I can't see the ground. What year is this? The controller's blood ran cold. He'd heard the rumors. He knew the story, but he wasn't prepared for what happened next. The radar blinked once, and for a split second, the blip appeared. A plane. Flying too slow to stay in the air and too low to be safe. The controller grabbed binoculars and ran to the window. He expected darkness. He expected clouds. Instead, he saw it. A massive jet with the bright blue Pan Am logo moving silently across the night sky. No engine sound, no beacon lights, no vibrations. Just a ghost gliding above the runway with windows full of unmoving silhouettes. The pilot looked down through the cockpit window, his face pale and frozen, like someone trapped in a memory that refuses to end. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the plane dissolved into the clouds as if the night swallowed it whole. Officials arrived within minutes. They locked down the tower, confiscated all recordings, threatened both controllers. This didn't happen, they said. You saw nothing. But something strange remained. The runway beneath the sighting had a long, thin streak of burn marks, fresh, warm, like a jet had passed over it just seconds earlier. Only one question grew louder, darker, more terrifying. Where was Flight 914 going? And what was it running from? A leaked document, never confirmed, never officially denied, mentioned something the pilot allegedly said right before the government erased the original recordings. A whisper, almost inaudible. There were lights. Before we disappeared, they surrounded us, pulled us in. We didn't know where we were. The last line was distorted, broken. Time doesn't move. Here. The document ends abruptly, pages missing, words blacked out, names covered. But one phrase remained, a final note scribbled by an investigator who seemed terrified of his own conclusion. The plane did not fly for 37 years. The plane experienced no time. Meaning, for the pilot and passengers, the takeoff, the flight, the landing attempt, all happened in the same hour. But the world outside had jumped 37 years forward, like the aircraft slipped out of time itself. Some called it a wormhole, some said a time rift, others whispered something far worse, an intelligence beyond human understanding that took the plane, returned it, then took it back. But the scariest theory was the one whispered by the ground crew. The plane wasn't trying to escape, it was trying to come back. Something wouldn't let it. Because every time it appears, the radio says the same words. We departed from New York, July 2nd, 1955. As if the plane is stuck repeating the moment just before it vanished. A loop, a trap, a sky that leads nowhere and never lets go. And somewhere, right now, above the clouds, in some layer of the sky we still don't understand. Pan Am Flight 914 might still be flying. Passengers frozen in time. A pilot trying to land in a world that keeps changing. A plane searching for a runway that doesn't exist anymore. And maybe, just maybe, one day, it will appear again. Asking once more, Tower, what year is this? You stand there frozen, watching the impossible unfold. The engines of Pan Am Flight 914 scream to life, far louder than any aircraft of its age should ever sound. The ground crew jumps back in fear as heat blasts from the engines, scorching the tarmac beneath it. Emergency officers shout, waving their hands, trying to stop the plane. But the aircraft isn't slowing. It's turning. The gigantic jet begins to pivot sharply, as if the pilot has only one mission: escape. Through the tower windows, you see the pilot's silhouettes moving quickly, panicked, frantic. They're not trying to land anymore. They're trying to run. Pan Am 914, stop! Do not take off, you yell into the radio. No response. Only the rising howl of engines hitting full power. The plane swings around, nose facing the runway again, and begins accelerating. Block the runway! Block it! Someone shouts. But it's too late. The plane charges forward, faster and faster, its wheels pounding the ground, leaving behind a trail of smoke and confusion. Officers scramble out of the way. A fire truck swerves into the grass to avoid being hit. Passengers inside press their faces against the windows, confused, terrified, unable to understand why their ordinary flight to Miami has turned into a nightmare. You watch helplessly as the aircraft speeds down the runway. 50 knots, 80 knots, 120 knots. Its nose lifts, and then it takes off. But what happens after takeoff defies everything you know. As the plane rises into the air, the sunlight around it begins to distort, not like heat waves, not like turbulence. Something else. A shimmer, a bend, a ripple in the sky itself. You blink hard. The plane seems to blur, fade, almost like a reflection on water, and then it vanishes. Not into clouds, not behind a building, not into darkness. It simply dissolves into thin air. Gone. Every radar screen in the tower goes blank. Every frequency goes silent. All that's left is the faint echo of engines that no longer exist. The runway crew stares into the empty sky, mouths open, unable to process what they just witnessed. A few minutes pass. Nobody speaks. Nobody moves. Nobody breathes. Then the phone on your desk rings, a slow, chilling ring that fills the room with dread. You answer it, hands trembling. A voice whispers on the other end, weak, strained, old, and tired. "Don't look for us." Your heart stops. The voice continues. "We never meant to leave New York. We never meant to come here. We don't know where we were." A long, broken pause. "And we don't know where we're going next." The line goes dead. You slowly lower the phone, your hands shaking so violently you can barely hold it. Seconds later, your radar screen flickers. For just a moment, and a single dot reappears. A dot moving faster than any commercial plane could ever travel. Then it vanishes again, just like the plane, just like the voice, just like the truth. For days, the airport is locked down. Officials interrogate everyone, pilots, engineers, tower staff, emergency crews. Nobody can explain what happened. The plane left behind no traces, no debris, no tire marks, not even heat residue, as if it never touched the runway at all. But late one night, weeks later, you receive a message. A small envelope slid under your apartment door. Inside it, a single piece of paper. One line, written in shaky handwriting, "We saw a city of lights, floating in the clouds," and then everything went dark. You stare at the message for hours, replaying every second of that day. The radio call, the landing, the questions, the panic, the disappearance. What happened to Pan Am Flight 914? Where did it go for 37 years? And why? Did it come back at all? No one knows. Not the officials, not the investigators, not the tower workers, but sometimes, late at night when radio static fills the silence, you swear you can still hear that pilot's voice. "Caracas Tower. This is Pan Am Flight 914, requesting permission to land." And you wonder, what if one day that voice answers back again?